Benito Juarez, he was the first president of indigenous descent, being of Zapotec origin. So we want to make space for all of that and make sure that we all acknowledge that. So with that, I will turn it over to Isaí Pasos. I'm not sure where he's at, but he's with Comunidades, Indigenas, and Liderazgo, or CIELO, and Grupo Cultural Mexicano. They will perform and narrate a traditional indigenous dance for us. So here you go, Isaí.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. Pajur yoitere, buenas tardes. In Zapoteco, Pajur means hola, ¿cómo están? No? Buenas tardes. Well, today we are celebrating a very important holiday for some of us, and for some others, not really important. But today we want to show you a little bit of the traditions of the Zapoteco community, and as well as one community, which is the Mije community. The Mije community I will explain later on, but today I want to present to you the region of El Istmo. It's a Zapoteco community, and today you will be seeing a little bit of what our traditions of Zapoteco or indigenous communities have to offer. Once again, thank you very much for having us, and here we go, the region of Istmo from the state of Oaxaca, Mexico.
Sandunga, mamá, mamá, las estrellas te bajaran, cielos de mi corazón. La luna a tus pies pusiera, Sandunga, cielos de amor. Con el sol te coronara, cielos de mi corazón. La luna a tus pies pusiera, Sandunga, mamá y mamá, con el sol te coronara. Sandunga, tú eres mi yunca. Sandunga, mamá, mamá, cruzando espinas y abrojos, cielos de mi corazón. Y saben por qué he venido, Sandunga, mamá, mamá, por ver tus divinos ojos, cielos de mi corazón. Y saben por qué he venido, Sandunga, mamá y mamá, por ver tus divinos ojos. Sandunga, tú eres mi yunca. Sandunga, tu amor me mata.
Thank you. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Why did we start with this beautiful dance? This is the region of El Istmo of the state of Oaxaca. What you see right now is actually a huipil that is made by hand, embroidered by hand. It takes about a month to make one. So if you are in the state of Oaxaca and you see one of these, it takes a long time. And that's the reason why they're really, really expensive. They range between $600 and up. And everyone's like, but why is it so expensive? Because they actually literally take every single day, 8 hours, 12-hour shifts doing it, trying to create this beautiful art. And then, so I'm sorry. We're gonna start in a second. I'm sorry, he's testing the music. So, it's testing the music, making sure we have the right one. Thank you very much. But then, it is very important to also know that, I don't know if you noticed the second song, which was polka. See, in our community, it's something that we adapted. See, so the polka is not something that we created. It's something that we adapted. Now, why did we adapt it? And that is something that we're probably going to be learning later on. Okay? What you're going to see now is a community of the region of the Mijes. Why did we decide to present to you Mijes? Because this is a community that this is a community that was kept indigenous. They were not welcoming other communities to join them. That's why in Spanish they say los jamás conquistados, never conquered. Okay, so what you're going to see, the steps that you're going to see today are steps that are really soft, steps that are actually of respect, steps that are actually meant to show the community that everything that is around them is related to respect. Okay, so with you, thank you very much. We are starting Sones y Jarabes Mijes. Gracias. So that was the region of Mijes. As you saw, it was more calm. Now we're going to go to the Sierra Juárez. Sierra Juárez, which is where Zapotecos are. And that is where Benito Juárez was part of. La Sierra Juárez del Estado de Oaxaca. And today we're going to present to you Sones y Jarabes de Betaza. It is a really upbeat, it's more happy tunes, music, you will feel it. And the reason why is that in the Sierra Juárez, we are known to be party people. What does that mean? That we like parties. Yes. I want to say one of my colleagues, Odilia Romero, I don't know where she is right now, but if she's around, here, oh, she's back here. Odilia Romero is actually from Sogocho. I am from Yelala. And our festivities are actually 5 to 10 days long. We start the first day and we start the party. That's how it is. Our weddings are actually between 5 to 8 days. See, so these are parties. So if you want to actually go to Oaxaca and want to get married in Oaxaca, especially in the Sierra Juárez, make sure you prepare. Okay? Because it's going to be first, second, third, and fourth, fifth. Oh my God. But with you guys, we're going to present to you Sones y Jarabes de Betaza. And I'm sorry if I can ask kind gentleman in the back, can help you with track number 1, please, the first one. Really appreciate it. The first track that you will see there. Yes, thank you so much. He's been helping me. I'm sorry. It's just that right now, we're trying to, accommodate everything, and I really appreciate his time. No, we appreciate us, for having us. Thank you so much. And here we go. This is Odilia Romero, if you haven't met her. Odilia Romero, there she is. Ahora sí, Sones y Jarabes de Betaza. That is Sones y Jarabes de Betas. As you saw, they were dancing holding hands. That is something that was just implemented recently. We're talking about maybe 70 years ago. Because before, everything will be at a distance. Like we're doing right now with COVID times, right? Everything at a distance. So what it is that the reason why is because there was a respect back then. But now, as times started changing, then we started dancing with our partners, holding hands. But that it was just basically a brief summary, because I know we could actually spend hours and hours talking about dances and music and why and this and that. But that was our participation. Once again, we really want to thank you for having us here. Thank you very much. I will hand this over really quick to Odilia Romero, who's going to give us a few words really quick. 1 minute, because I know we are on the time limit. So Odilia, gracias.
Padjurs krenle bajirenga ushalar joda jak cheneto bene. Well, I'm not going to even interpret that, but anyways, there's 4 regions in the Zapotec community. There's the Isthmus that are proud to have defeated the French. It's called the Batalla de Juchitán. I'm not a historian, so don't quote me on anything about it, but the community is very proud. And for those who speak Spanish, and know Spanish slang, they said, le rompimos la madre a los franceses. And that's something you hear when you go to their town. They're very proud of it. And of course, the president at that time was Benito Juarez, for very close to our region. We always joke about Benito. He's not here to defend himself, but he used to love French food, even though, for European culture. I don't know that he ate French food, but he loved European culture. And a lot of the politics that he did implement was affects us to these days as indigenous people when it comes to land rights. But we are very proud of him because he defeated the French, and he was the only indigenous president that Mexico has had. That's our side of the story as Zapotecs. But now you heard me say hello in Zapoteco. Now I'm going to ask the chef, Poncho, to say hello in Zapoteco. I mean, I already said it.
Yo no necesito micrófono. Muchísimas gracias por invitarnos a traer nuestra comida aquí en este lugar por primera vez, y con el carrito que estamos esperando la última firma para sacarlo a la calle. Gracias.
Okay, stay there, Poncho. Isaí, can you say what I said? If you know what I said.
No. Okay. Not all of it, no. Pero Pajur yoitere hushkere santaras bazareani. Buenas tardes a todos. Qué bueno que están aquí. But she'll explain why.
We're all Zapotecs. He's an hour from me. He's an hour from him. Can we have a conversation in Zapotec, the 3 of us? No, never. Do we eat the same food? Not really.
But we're really close.
We're very close. The way they eat their beef stew is with avocado leaves. I eat it with cilantro. He eats it with something else. So the whole point of me explaining you to this is because as an organization, CIELO, we advocate for language rights, because we're constantly fighting language violence. There's every day in every institution of this county, there's language violence against indigenous people and also a relative from the African diaspora. And we want to change that. From the DA's office to the police, to the sheriff, to the Department of Children's Services, they need to know about our existence and about the diversity of our language. 3 Zapotecs in one place, we cannot communicate. So thank you for your time, and thank you, Supervisor, for supporting a language rights plan for indigenous people. We really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you. All right, everybody. Again, a round of applause for Grupo Cultural, CIELO, and Poncho Tlayula. So for this part, we're going to transition over to the auditorium, which is in the front. But before you do that, please, we're going to exit this way. There's going to be trash cans. Please throw away your trash in there and your water bottles, anything you use. We cannot take food or water in there. Yes, we're respecting the library. Other than that, yep. So let's transition over to the dialogue.
Cinco de Mayo is the most popular Latino celebration in the United States. Every year, millions of people celebrate it in venues ranging from small grammar school dances to large commercial fiestas. Yet, in Mexico, the Cinco de Mayo is not widely celebrated as it is in the U.S. So the question is, why is the Cinco de Mayo so widely celebrated in the U.S. when it is not in Mexico? The answer is that the public celebration of Cinco de Mayo was created by Latinos living in the American West, California, Nevada, and Oregon during the dark days of the American Civil War. Wait a minute. Latinos in the American Civil War? What is that all about? During the American Civil War, many Spanish-language newspapers were published in California. In Los Angeles, El Amigo del Pueblo, and, for example, in San Francisco, El Eco del Pacífico. We can read these Spanish-language newspapers today, and we can hear Latino voices speaking to us from 150 years ago. At times, the voices tell us about Latino daily life, restaurants serving Mexican food, musicians to provide tunes, musical and theatrical performances, births of the next generation, weddings, and deaths. We also hear the voices of Latinos concerned about policy issues that were tearing the United States apart, like slavery and race. When the American Civil War erupted, Latinos supported Abraham Lincoln and the United States against the Confederate slave states who wanted to create a new nation built upon forced labor held in chains. Latinos took up arms against the slave states. Major José Ramón Pico organized 4 troops of Spanish-speaking United States cavalry. But from the very first armed encounter of the Civil War, the slave states rode a streak of luck, winning battle after battle, while the Spanish-language newspapers informed Latino readers of defeat after defeat for the United States Army. And then, things got worse. Taking advantage of Lincoln's preoccupation with the Civil War, Napoleon III, Emperor of the French, sent his troops marching towards Mexico City to overthrow the constitutional republic headed by President Benito Juárez, and install Maximilian of Austria as the Emperor of Mexico, who would then be free to cooperate with the slave states in the rebellion against the United States. But the French troops were stopped dead at the Battle of Puebla, fought on Cinco de Mayo of 1862, and could not reach Mexico City to create a slave state friend south of the border. In California, Nevada, and Oregon, Latinos read the news of the unexpected victory of Cinco de Mayo and immediately began celebrating this first major victory with the Latino music and dances of the American Civil War. And you will notice they did not use mariachi music, for the simple reason that mariachis had not yet been invented. And they did not have dancing Adelitas, as those were to be the symbols of the 20th century Mexican Revolution. Every Cinco de Mayo during the Civil War, Latinos in the American West would gather in great crowds to hear speeches.
On this great day of Cinco de Mayo, we remember the power of hope, the power of the people to overcome great odds. And we remember, we've won in the past, and we will win again.
They would march in huge parades.
Today, we band together to join our brothers and sisters in the fight.
Speakers would remind Latinos that they were struggling against both the slave states and their potential ally, the Emperor of the French, Napoleon III.
We unite to raise money, people, and any other resources we can spare for Mexico's fight for independence.
After the parades and speeches, Latinos gathered in meeting halls and in private houses to renew their energies to stop the slave states and the French in Mexico, using the music and steps they were familiar with.
We all did, to say the least. Welcome, everybody. And I appreciate you. You've been saving me all night. I appreciate you, sister. I appreciate you. I appreciate you all coming out at the end of your workday to share in this experience with us. You know, this is our 4th gathering of the Racial Justice Learning Exchange. And we're experimenting with different days of the week, different times of day, to give everybody an opportunity to come out and participate in this learning exchange experience. I don't know about you, but I was really looking forward to tonight's gathering because this was a rough weekend, right? And it hit me kind of slow. I just felt a sense of heaviness and a lull, and I couldn't pinpoint it. I just know I felt it. And so I was really glad. Thank you, Frederica. Thank you, T. Mitchell, for the work that we've begun to do and build together with this Racial Justice Learning Exchange. The name is so important because I knew we would have a chance to gather tonight, to have a sense of community, and to talk about these important issues. Dr. Hayes-Bautista, to shed our own implicit bias, and I think the only way we do that is by learning new information. And I think the video was very compelling. Those of you who this may be your first experience with us, welcome. Last month we focused on the 30th anniversary of the 1992 uprising, and we uplifted how this district has risen in many geographic areas from, quite frankly, the ashes of despair, despite the persistence of structural racism, and we all know it certainly exists. And we highlighted ways in which we can continue to confront these institutional structures in our everyday lives. So today, we're going to uplift the racial justice origins of the holiday. And I'm going to use that, do air quotes when I talk about Cinco de Mayo from this point forward. I'm sure, frankly, the majority of us in the room weren't aware of the full story. That's why we thought the video was so important. So we're going to have the opportunity to dig a little deeper in this history and the significance of the Latinx community organizing against slavery and occupation during that time. That's really very powerful. So staff, T. Mitchell, who have postcards, wave them. If you have questions, you know this is how we do it. Get a note card now if you think you're going to have a question, and so when we get to the Q&A portion of the program, we'll be ready. I am delighted to officially introduce you to my partner in equity and my partner in correcting history today, Dr. David Hayes-Bautista. He is the director of the Center for the Study of Latino Health and Culture and the author of the book we are highlighting today, El Cinco de Mayo, An American Tradition. Welcome. Please give him a round of applause.
Thank you.
So this is interesting. Dr. Hayes-Bautista is a professor of medicine and of public health at UCLA, not a historian.
Except I'm so old, I almost remember it all.
That's right. And what's so unique about the experience we're all getting to have with him is he was the first researcher to unearth the history of Cinco de Mayo and its origins in the Civil War. I, by accident, like literally, happened upon a podcast with your fellow UCLA colleague, Dr. Kelly Lytle Hernandez,
yes,
who just also recently published a book on Cinco de Mayo. And so you got your finger on the pulse. So before you tell us more about this history of Latinx people in the U.S. during the Civil War and how this tradition started, tell us a bit more about yourself and what compelled you to really kind of research and investigate this topic.
Okay. Well, to start with, I'm a native Angelino, born down in San Pedro, down in the harbor,
All right.
years ago.
Me and you both. Here's to the native Angelinos.
And in the 60s, was very involved in the Chicano movement, and we created sort of a piece of that. We called it the Chicano health movement.
Yes.
So I set up La Clínica de la Raza in Oakland. We had the audacious goal. We're just young kids, you know. We're going to bring health services where none existed. We're going to bring them in Spanish. We're going to bring them for free, and we had $240.
Oh, to be young.
And we did it.
Hey.
And 50 years later, La Clínica is one of the major healthcare providers. Ultimed used to be the Brown Beret Free Clinic at the same time. So we've always been involved in health, and of course that was because of lack of equity.
That's right.
I mean, the provider shortage, the services shortage, and they're still there, and we saw it with COVID.
Yes.
COVID really revealed who had access to public health infrastructure and who didn't.
That's right.
So I've been involved in this issue of racial justice in healthcare all my life, but from a professional level, looking at medicine, doing research, etc. Well, what happened was about 20 years ago, I was born and raised in California, went to school, went to fourth grade, did fourth grade history, learned all about California history. And I learned about the Spanish, and I learned about the missions, and I had to build a little toy mission. Any of you have to build a toy mission? Yeah, okay. So I did San Luis Obispo, because at that point, we lived in San Luis.
Then we parents had to do it again when our own kids were in the fourth grade. I was like, oh my God, get a new curriculum.
And I realized, this is almost exactly 20 years ago, I knew when the Spanish got here. When did the Mexicans get here? I didn't know. I did not know. And I'm a researcher at UCLA, so I figured, I need to know this, because I'm trying to understand Latino health. Well, when the heck did they get here? So I started doing what I do best. I do data. I'm a nerd. I'm a quant. Okay. So I started to create a demographic model of Latinos in California, looking at actually El Pueblo de Los Angeles is sort of my observation point. And I started digging up data from the Spanish colonial period. I dug up data from the Mexican Republic period. And I started digging up data from when the U.S. took over. But then the data stopped being so good because U.S. didn't require birth certificates or death certificates, barely marriage certificates. Suddenly I didn't have any data. So I discovered those Spanish language newspapers that I held one up. Well, it's just like today. You could read the LA Times today. And there's probably not a story about Latinos in it. And if it is, it's going to be either the gangbanger story or the illegal immigrant story or the teenage pregnant mom on welfare story. They've been doing that for 150 years. True. But you can pick up La Opinión, and it's like you step into a parallel universe. I mean, kids are winning the baseball trophy, a pet gets lost, a singer is coming by. It's like, wait a minute, this is the same town? The same thing was happening in the gold rush. So I put together, I think, the world's best collection of Spanish language newspapers published in California during the Gold Rush and Civil War to get the data. I was looking for announcements of births, marriages, and deaths. But to find them, I'd have to breeze through the entire issue to find them. So I'd be breezing through an issue and, oh, my gosh, the American Know Nothing Party, it was the pre-Trump party, 1854, won every office in California, and Latinos didn't like it. Oh my God, the Dred Scott case and the Spanish language editor here in Los Angeles just tore it to ribbons. Oh my gosh, John Brown's marching on Harper Ferry. Oh my God, the Confederate guns open on Fort Sumter. And I'm reading this in Spanish, and I'm looking for the births, marriages, and deaths, but I'm reading this other stuff. And then, oh my God, the French land in Veracruz, they're marching towards Mexico City. They're about a week's march away. Then I read about what happened, not only what happened there, but the effect that it caused here, because it took about 3 weeks for news to get from Mexico City to here. So I'm reading the reactions of Latinos after about a year of the American Civil War. Wow. Now, the important thing here is that in 1810, for Mexican independence, that's September 16th, when Father Hidalgo declared Mexican independence, he also declared, in literally the same breath, racial equality and citizenship for 300 years under the Spanish. Only the white Spaniards could be citizens. Racial equality and citizenship. Abolition of slavery. The Spanish had practiced slavery for 300 years. And he also continued an Iberian legal tradition that married women had rights. They had rights. So that was written into the Mexican Constitution. And not just Mexico. Every Latin American country that achieved independence from Spain at the same time abolished slavery and declared racial equality and citizenship, and married women had rights. Every single country. Well, guess what? California was part of Mexico.
That's right.
So those were the constitutional values that about a generation grew up just thinking, yeah, this is normal. We got rid of slavery. There's racial equality. Women have rights, you know. What's the big news here? Except on February 2nd, 1848, under the provisions of the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo, the U.S. takes over California, and its constitution is very different because it protects slavery, denies citizenship to non-whites, and when a woman married, she suffered what's called legal death. She ceased to exist as a legal entity. She couldn't even sue her husband because the husband was going to make all the decisions for everybody.
Right.
Well, Latinos didn't like that. So Latinos went to the California Constitutional Convention in 1849, and I think it was the last time that Latinos were reasonably well represented, almost proportionately. Oh. And California's Constitution honored Mexico's earlier abolition of slavery. We did not allow slavery in the state of California. It allowed non-whites to be citizens. Pio Pico, for example, who was the last Mexican governor. You know Pico Boulevard?
Yes.
Them Picos, okay.
Yes.
Well, he was Afro-Mexican. He was a citizen here. He voted in every election until 1894. If you ever went to Alabama, you know he was a piece of furniture. And married women had rights, and we came in as a bilingual state. Not bad for 1849.
Not bad at all. Too bad we've gone backwards.
So when the Civil War broke out, it was clear. Here are the two sides. The South fighting to maintain slavery, white supremacy, and elitist plantation rule. Lincoln eventually, he had to get pushed there a little bit for abolition of slavery, racial equality, and government of the people, by the people, and for the people. Latino said, we're with Lincoln, we're with the Union. Because the South was trying to expand. Right. You know, the Confederacy arrived at the Arizona River, and their next stop was here, the port of Los Angeles. They needed a deep water port away from the blockade. So they were coming. So for Latinos, this was very serious business. Latinos from the very first day joined the armed forces. We had 4 units of Spanish-speaking cavalry here in California. You also had Spanish-speaking United States cavalry in New Mexico. The first full admiral of the United States Navy was a bilingual, bicultural Latino, David Farragut. Oh, it's pronounced Farragut in D.C. There's a metro stop, Farragut Square, Farragut. So Latinos bet the ranch, and the Union proceeded to lose. From the very first Battle of Bull Run, second Battle of Bull Run, things were looking bad, and that's when the French went into Mexico. But they were stopped dead at the Battle of Puebla, and they couldn't get there in time to install Maximilian to be of any use to the slave states. So that win basically gave Lincoln a year to find a general, General Meade, who could finally beat the Confederates at the Battle of Gettysburg. Absent that, Maximilian would have been there. He would have made an arrangement. He could have recognized the Confederacy. They would have won. That's all they wanted. Well, up here in California, Latinos were experiencing the Battle of Puebla through their experience of the American Civil War, which is why they immediately began celebrating. It was like, wow, we won a big one. For Latinos, it was one war with 2 fronts. A front against the slave states in the South and against the French in Mexico. But around issues of freedom, equality, and democracy. Those are the overarching issues. So that is why after the victory of the Battle of Puebla, and the U.S. then went into the disastrous Peninsular Campaign under McClellan, where he got beaten in a 7 days battle, and Robert E. Lee emerged as the Confederate general. I mean, that was horrible news, but Latinos remembered, we won a big one. It galvanized them to organizing the first network of regional political organizations called the Juntas Patrióticas Mexicanas. 129 cities in California, Nevada, and Oregon organized a Junta Patriótica. They met every month to raise funds to send to Juarez so he could buy munitions. Some Latinos went south and joined the Mexican army. Some Latinos went east and fought with the Union Army. They were into this. So at their every monthly meeting, they would talk about the victory of the Battle of Puebla, and every year they began commemorating the victory of the Battle of Puebla as a civil rights commemoration. Freedom, equality, and democracy. That was what they were celebrating. Not the food, not the music. Freedom, equality, and democracy, and that's how it all began.
But, you know, quite frankly, as people of color, when we celebrate, there's food and music involved. I mean, let's just be clear. That's what ties us all together, quite frankly. The amazing dance presentation we heard earlier, I was like, I'm a partier. I could go to the wedding for 5 to 8 days until I saw the dancing. I was like, yeah, no, I wouldn't last half the night. So now, after hearing that, to all of you, so tell us about the Cinco de Mayo celebrations during the Civil War, and what did those involve?
They involved recommitment to both Lincoln and to Juarez, to fighting for freedom, equality, democracy, and putting their money where their mouth was, and joining and voting for Lincoln. That was a big time. We have a poster of an ad taken out in newspapers here in California in Spanish, trying to promote Vote for Lincoln, using both the Mexican and the U.S. flags to promote voting for Lincoln, because he's a president of freedom, equality, and democracy. So it was very much a military and civil rights commemoration, but with good music and dancing, too. You saw some of that.
Good music and dancing. So, you know, there were many social movements during the 60s. You talked about coming up during that time, the Black Power movement, the American Indian movement, the Chicano movement. Did the meaning of the celebration change during different time periods, you think?
Yes, it has, which is part of the reason why it was kind of discovery. I mean, I was reading the dispatches, and I was reading the speeches that people made here, and kind of putting two and two together. And now I know why we celebrate it here, and it's not celebrated in Mexico. It's the Civil War experience more than anything else. So what happened is you had probably about 20,000 Latinos who were members of these organizations. That's a pretty good number when the total population of California is about 100,000.
Sure was.
Really involved in this. They were involved in the military. So after the Civil War and the French intervention was over, every Cinco de Mayo, they'd parade through the streets right here in Los Angeles every year. And the veterans would put on their uniforms, either the Mexican Army or U.S. Army uniforms. They'd parade through the streets. They'd have the speeches. Well, they began to die off around about 1880, 1890, but their kids who had grown up with this sort of picked it up, and they continued the tradition. Well, by about 1910, those kids were getting kind of old, and that generation was starting to pass off. And that was before they had anything like ethnic studies, you know, Chicano studies, black studies, none of that. You didn't have journals. And the history was never committed to paper. It was always in people's experience. But as that generation died off, there was no way to pass that on. That was just as another wave of immigration came from Mexico, fleeing the Mexican Revolution. They saw that here were these big Cinco de Mayos, which they were not doing in Mexico. They were a great community organizing tool. It pulls the community together. So the immigrants started doing it, but not knowing the history, they brought in their symbolism. That's why it's the Pancho Villa and the Revolucionarias, you know, with the bandoleros and everything else. That's where we get that from.
Got it.
Because they didn't know the history. You know, for us Chicanos, we didn't know the history either. So we did it differently. I mean, at UC Berkeley, we did the first Cinco de Mayo there in, I believe, 1970. So what did we do? A salsa concert at the Greek Theater. We didn't know. We didn't know.
Right.
But for us, it was kind of, the whole Battle of Puebla is kind of a David versus Goliath. It was kind of a parable that even though you're outnumbered, nonetheless, if your cause is just, if your heart is pure, you too can achieve, like we did with setting up these clinics. They're still there 50 years ago. But that was it. It was kind of a symbol, like Civil War, are you kidding?
Right.
And then it got really commercialized here in LA. Some of you might remember that old, what was it, LA Fiesta Broadway, started in the mid-90s. You know, 500,000 people would show up. It was always around Cinco de Mayo. They'd never say Cinco de Mayo, and of course it was all purely commercial. Nothing about civil rights. So a lot of, you know, veteranos like me, we thought, well, that's what Cinco de Mayo has become. Phooey, I want nothing to do with it. And then I was reading these old newspapers, and it fell out on my lap. And I said, I have to share this story. Now I know why we celebrate it here. And it's about civil rights. So I've shared it. I've been sharing it ever since.
And how timely and how important for us all to learn. So now for our guests. In your opinion, how is the history of Latinx people during the Civil War relevant to the race dynamics facing all of us today?
It's interesting. Occasionally my wife gets really depressed when she reads the news.
Yes, we shared that. Dr. Hayes Batista, she's here. Wave your hand.
Oh, she had to go get some diapers. Oh. There's a Costco close by.
Gotcha.
We're grandparents, so we got to do that thing. But I tell her, well, actually, we've done this before. In fact, there have been waves of nativism sweeping across the U.S. on about 20-year cycles. And it started with the American Know Nothing movement in the 1850s, the first rise of the Ku Klux Klan in the 1870s, the American Protective Association of the 1890s, protecting America from what? From immigrants and Catholics, right, and Jews. You had the second rise of the Ku Klux Klan and the segregation of the West in the 19-teens. You had the massive Mexican deportations of the 30s. You had Operation Wetback of the 50s, English only in the 70s, Prop 187 in the 90s. And in 2017, right on schedule, Donald Trump. He's right on schedule every 20 years.
Oh, he was right on time. How painful.
Now, the good news is, at some point the streets have got to get paved. At some point, things have just got to work. And that's the problem with these nativist movements. That's not their priority. They're, hooping and hollering, jumping up and down and scaring everybody, and things don't work. So eventually, people get tired, and we need a government that works. Puts up things like these libraries. Now, that's what we need most of the time. So, yes, they come on 20-year cycles. There was I thought the most fatuous op-ed headline in the LA Times today. I pointed out to my wife, and she accused me of being an angry Chicano. Okay. And it said, white supremacy has become normalized, and we let it happen. You would think it just happened for the first time. It is built into the first Constitution. I do the census.
Right.
So I've been tracking how they trace and why they trace race and ethnicity from the very first census in 1790. I told her, what do you mean, how do we let it happen? It was built in from day one. Right. Is how do we respond to it? Yes, that's what changes.
And what your response to that question reminds me is, if we don't know our history, if we don't know it's cyclical, if we don't understand the core motivating driver, be it economics, power, control, whatever the case, then we're not in a position of power to change it. History will continue to repeat itself over and over and over again.
Until we stand up and say,
Until we learn, as many of us have done today, in terms of the history of Cinco de Mayo, and make the conscious decision to do something different about it.
Now, my goal, by the way, is not to stop celebrating Cinco de Mayo, just to bring back people to what it was originally. It was civil rights, freedom, equality, democracy. Let's make sure that is front and center. Then we can go and party.
I agree. To use it as a convening, by any means necessary, whatever it takes to get the people in the room to have the conversation. Much like Juneteenth. As a native Californian, Juneteenth, I was a young adult before I heard the term. It was a Texas-based holiday. But the reality is the same in terms of the delay of information sharing. Tell our gathering what you shared with me, the link.
Between Cinco de Mayo and Juneteenth,
Please
by the way. Okay, so Juneteenth, finally word gets to Texas. Oh, by the way, slavery is abolished. Okay. On Juneteenth, 1867, the emperor, so-called Maximilian, had been captured. He was tried, sentenced to death, and he was executed on Juneteenth, 1867, putting all of that baloney to rest.
Isn't that fascinating?
We share Juneteenth.
The ongoing conversation, the history around Cinco de Mayo, and that it was really about civil rights fundamentally, that it was about fighting against the expansion of slavery in this country, and now to learn that we share a relevant history around Juneteenth. That is phenomenal. And I think, like you, when Biden signed the bill to make Juneteenth a law last year, there was lots of conversation in the African American community as to whether or not it was something to really be celebrated. But I agree with you that whatever it takes to bring people into the room to gather that allows us to share accurate information about our history, I'm all for it.
Okay.
I agree with you.
And I think history is great. And there's something, let me address all the Latinos in the room here, by the way. I want you, next Cinco de Mayo, go down to La Placita, and they have a plaque that honors the pobladores who founded El Pueblo de Los Angeles in 1781.
Yes.
And in the typical Spanish fashion, it gives the race of every one of the pobladores.
And there's several negras in there.
40.
I've seen it.
In fact, of the 44, 25% were Afro-Mexicans.
That's right.
And they didn't go anywhere.
Right.
So when people talk about the old California roots, Spanish, well, actually it's African and indigenous. And oh, by the way, you had a lot of Filipinos because they were the sailors on the boats, and there were Filipinos in that original groups. So we had Indians, Africans, Asians, Iberians, kind of like today, and that's how LA got started.
And that's why we love it. That's what LA is all about. How many of you have actually seen that plaque? It is, yes, it is something to behold when you look at those names and understand who the true founding mothers and fathers of LA are, and it's us. And from my perspective, it's our responsibility then to make LA the kind of place that we want to grow old in with dignity and raise our children to thrive. So that's why I do what I do, and that's why we're here together to make that happen.
Bravo.
Before we turn it over to questions, because I'm sure staff wave cards if you have them, so I know how many questions that we have. Tell us about the work you're doing at the center to make this history known to more people, and just the work you're doing at the center that's important for all of us to know and recognize.
Oh, okay. Well, let me just chat about I guess my day job, which is being an epidemiologist demographer. And we've been, obviously with COVID, we devoted a big chunk of our attention to COVID, and it was really, really clear some of the problems that lack of representation caused in how we approach COVID as a society. Now, if you remember, early on, we decided that there were some people that we called essential workers, made sure they got personal protective equipment. I'm on the board of a community hospital over in Boyle Heights, Flight Memorial, so we made sure that the physician nurses got trained. We had negative pressure rooms and everything else. But we forgot that farm workers are also essential workers, because don't we like to eat a couple of times a day?
That's right.
And the packing house workers and the people in the food industry and the bus drivers and the mechanics are a whole bunch of other essential workers. We didn't think of them as essential workers. Right. So we said, oh yes, well, unplug your laptop, stay at home, close the door, don't talk to anybody, and order everything in.
Right.
Well, that works in Beverly Hills. Right. You got the type of job, you're going to get a paycheck whether you're in the office or not. Right. You're going to keep your health insurance. You can afford to do stuff online. But all these essential workers that kept that household going, that had to be out there delivering, making things. So it was because of the essential workers, they got more exposed to the coronavirus.
Yes.
Because they're out there dealing with crews, fellow workers, or with public. Had less access to care. You remember the first about 3 or 4 months, you actually had to get a doctor's order just to get a test.
Right.
Yeah. And the test was going to cost $300 or $400. Right. So if you're a farm worker, no doctor's here and I can't afford it. I don't know if I've got coronavirus, but I've got to go to work.
Right.
So these issues just kept multiplying. So Beverly Hills came out pretty good because they have pretty good access to care and people think about them. But there are the other folks that people didn't think about until we made issues of it.
That's right.
These too are essential workers.
That's right.
And they deserve protection. They deserve access to care.
Right.
So after about a year, I think that message started to sink in. But meanwhile, there was that year lag. And of course, the Latino, African American, Asian, and particularly the Pacific Islander and American Indian community just got whacked by COVID. But because we were working, we were holding this place together.
Right. It's true. That's true.
That's my day job.
I get your day job. You know what? That's my day job too. In terms of holding that truth up, not allowing it to be forgotten, and to make sure that as we talk about building back equitably, that we don't simply divide our resources equally by the 5 districts, but the communities that were disproportionately impacted deserve a disproportionate investment in all of these recovery dollars. And that's the work we're leading at LA County. Okay, we've got a couple questions, and you know I ran late. You know my staff was waving the red sheet, and this was too intriguing. I just kept on talking, because we got to punt over to Alfonso, the soon-to-be new dad, who's going to talk about the book, and then we went to the library staff to tell you about this amazing space that we're in. So very quickly. Whew. That's interesting. During the Civil War, wasn't California split North versus South as well? How did this affect Chicanos?
Well, actually, there was a lot of Confederate sentiment in California. And it was centered primarily here in Southern California, which is why they built the drum barracks out there close by, because there was feared that there would be a sort of a Confederate insurrection, so that the Spanish-speaking Latino United States Cavalry was stationed here to keep track on the English-speaking Confederate sympathizers. There were Confederate bandits working in the Coast Range Hills. They would hold up stagecoaches. Anybody who supported Lincoln, they'd shoot them. They were chased to the ground by the Spanish-speaking United States Cavalry. Yeah, it was not so simple as California likes to make it sound like. There was a lot of Confederate sympathizers.
Right.
And after the Civil War, the whole Gold Country area is the hotbed of that 1870s rise of Ku Klux Klan. You know, white men must rule America again, blah, blah, blah. So it's not quite as easy peasy as people like to make it sound like.
Mary Lee says would like to hear a little more about how the census has helped normalize white supremacy.
Well, by asking the question. Remember, the reason why we have these race ethnic questions, I have colleagues say from Middle East, they say, we need a Middle East racial group. I say, you don't want that. It was not put there because they were friendly. They were identified, and it goes from the Constitution to the very first census to identify who was and who was not able to be a citizen. And you remember the value that was placed on black slaves, 3/5 of a person, for purposes of representation. They couldn't vote,
right,
but they could get disproportionate representation on a 3/5 basis. So that was built into our very first census to determine who could not participate, who could not get the full benefits. And they have been in every single census. I've looked at the instructions to the enumerators, how they are instructed to determine who is of what race, because they didn't ask you what race you were until 1980. Up until then, it was the person taking the census looked at you and made that decision.
Fascinating.
And that enumerator was supposed to make, and they were told, you must make a distinction between Negro, mulatto, quadroon, and octoroon. Well, how's it? A guy who's a temporary, but they have these categories and people had to get fit into them. Then later they collapsed after the one-drop rule, so it didn't matter. You're all black anyway.
That's right. That's right.
So and then we put in Asians after we kicked the Chinese out of California with the rise in the post-Reconstruction first rise of the Ku Klux Klan. We rewrote our Constitution here in California. Now, we couldn't bring back slavery because the Civil War made that, but basically we resegregated African Americans, we took citizenship away from the Indigenous, and we kicked the Chinese out of California, and we got rid of the bilingual provision. So we tried to bring it back to the rest of the country in 1878. So it's been this constant tug of war all the way through, but these categories were there primarily to exclude people. Yes. So when people say, well, we need an Armenian category, be careful, because what they get used for is not for very friendly purposes.
Fascinating.
They are not scientific, by the way. That's what we point out.
Clearly not. If the enumerator was asked to just look at you and figure it out.
Well, in fact, I'm just a simple engineer by training. In the 1870 census, you were supposed to determine the difference between who would have one drop of black blood and who did not. Okay, and so they described that. But then they didn't draw any blood. First of all, they didn't define what was white blood and what was black blood and what was the difference. They never defined that. Secondly, nobody ever drew blood samples. In science, you've got to draw a blood sample. Do they have that, whatever it is that makes you white or black? And there were no lab tests.
No.
But yet it was presented as if it were scientific fact. And it wasn't. It was just some enumerator, temporary employee, looking at people, using, they were all men at those points, local racial narrative to decide who's white, who's black, who's Asian, etc.
Bringing their own bias to the equation.
Yeah. And those biases are still embedded in medicine, by the way.
And other segments of society,
I argue with NIH. They're still embedded. People, I didn't know. I thought we did that to help you. Now, the question is, what will replace them? And we're working on that. Because it turns out, here in California, in 2015, half the babies born in California had mothers and fathers of different race groups. So I ask, okay, under which group do you record the weight of the baby? And if that group, why not the other, and why not something else? just our reality. We don't stay in our racial lanes. We never have. But it's going to be a situation where even if we try to think that they're scientific, people just aren't going to be working within them. So then what do we do? So we're trying to figure out, we need a different epistemology to talk about human samenesses and differences, but for what purpose and for what reason? There are health disparities. We need to be able to identify them. If we stopped asking anything, we'd never know that there was a black infant mortality crisis.
That's right.
Okay, but we don't want to do it by imputing it to blackness, which is when you have that race category, it sort of gets people thinking that. So how do we describe the groups that are at risk in non-racializing terms? That's where we're trying to go.
Is your head about to explode like mine's about to explode?
I'm sorry.
We're going to have to wrap. I see hands are going up. Dr. Hayes Bautista will be around if you want to ask him a question or ask me a question. We'll be around for a little bit. But please give him a round of applause. This is why you come to the Racial Justice Learning Exchange. We learn new information. This was amazing. Very quickly before I transition over to staff, who will never give me the mic again because I don't pay attention to the instructions, I want you to hear about the book club and hear from library staff who will share a few words to close us out and to remind us of a couple things. Save the date, please, for our 5th Racial Justice Learning Exchange gathering. You know, we're doing a monthly as long as there's not a revolution on my staff and they all say we can't keep up with this schedule. But for now, Friday, June 17th, 12 to 4 at Magic Johnson Park is our 2nd annual Juneteenth celebration. And for me, given what I learned today, it's going to be all the more powerful and impactful. So thank you for sharing that with me. You know, we talked about and wanted to cover this topic in May because of your book and the relevance. You know, May is also Asian American Pacific Islander Heritage Month. We pay tribute to Jewish Americans also. It's their Heritage Month. It's also Mental Health Awareness Month. So I hope that you will be mindful of all of those topics, but most importantly that you share the information that we were gifted today with 5, 10 more people, because that was rich and deep. Share the book, let them know about all the amazing information we heard. I'm going to hand it over to staff. I'm going to hand you all the card. Any final words, Dr. Hayes Bautista, you want to offer?
You can buy the book and I'll sign it if you buy it tonight.
Hey! I'm going to hand you all the card for the people to thank, and I'm going to give you the mic so I won't make us any later.
All right, one more time, a round of applause for the dialogue, please. All right. I do want to say this is special as we're talking about racism throughout the United States, and this office, a political office, is doing it and doing it purposely so we could learn, so we all could come together. And then I'm going to transition now to the thank yous. So I want to thank CIELO Odilia Romero for participating, Poncho Tayula for the delicious food, UCLA Health and the Center for Studies of Latino Health and Culture, and last but not certainly least, the County Library and the AC Bilbrew Library and its wonderful staff. And then, and this is where I'm going to transition. Thank you, staff, as well. Appreciate y'all. Always. But this is our launch to our book club that we're going to be doing with the office. We're going to do them every 2 months. Our first book that we're going to be reading is Cinco de Mayo, An American Tradition by Dr. Hayes Bautista. So we will be reading this book, as mentioned. We also have it at the library, so if people want to come and rent it out, read it. We will be coming back on through Zoom on June 9, 2022 at 5 p.m., and we'll have a talk on the book and more details. So everyone's welcome. Please look at our RJLE website. Also look out for our email, but save the date, June 9, 2022. And then I'll pass it down to my co-lead with the book club, Victoria.
Hi, everyone. I'm Victoria Gomez. I'm going to co-lead the RGLE book club with him. And like he mentioned, the book club's going to happen about every 2 months, and it's going to align with the RGLE event that's happening that month. And we're going to be identifying libraries, community-owned bookstores, and universities that will be able to carry those books. Lastly, we'll be compiling and showcasing a list of recommended books to read on the RGLE website. And we welcome anyone who's seeking to expand or start their knowledge on social justice. Now on to our county library partners.
Thank you. Thank you for that overview, and what a wonderful program. Please join me in a round of applause for Supervisor Holly J. Mitchell, Dr. Hayes Bautista, and Team Mitchell of LA County 2nd District. Well, thank you. Now, tonight's program was truly insightful, and I'm sure that it inspired many of us to learn more about the history of Cinco de Mayo and other critical historical moments across other cultures and communities. So good evening, everyone. My name is Patricia Rivera, and I'm the Regional Administrator for LA County Libraries South Region. Providing free access to information, breaking down barriers, and creating opportunities to learn and spark curiosity is at the heart of what we do. Supporting civil discourse and awareness on important issues such as racial justice is important to LA County Library. Tonight's program aligned perfectly with the type of programs and initiatives our library system loves to showcase. I want to thank Supervisor Mitchell and our 2nd District for developing the Racial Justice Learning Exchange Series and for hosting tonight's discussion at AC Bilbrew Library. Now, AC Bilbrew Library is one of 85 brick and mortar libraries that make up LA County Library, which is one of the nation's largest and most innovative library systems. Our library system offers free public resources, including books, music, multimedia materials, computers, internet access, and educational and recreational services to more than 3.4 million residents through our community libraries, bookmobiles, and outreach vehicles. For those who may not know, IAC Bilbrew Library is home to our Black Resource Center and the African American Living Legends Series Program Archive, which highlights and honors leaders and visionaries of the African American community. Our Black Resource Center, along with our Chicano Resource Center, American Indian Resource Center, and our Asian Pacific Resource Center, provide a variety of books, materials, and resources that help spread awareness and understanding of other cultures, their history, and lived experiences. Our cultural resource centers are open to everyone and are hubs for inclusivity, equity, diversity, and education. And I encourage you to visit all of them when you have a chance. Now, to learn more about our cultural resource centers and relevant programs, please visit us at lacountylibrary.org. And if you would like to borrow a copy of tonight's featured book, El Cinco de Mayo, An American Tradition by Dr. Hayes Bautista, visit our website and place a hold for the item to pick up at your nearest library. The website again is lacountylibrary.org. Thank you everyone for joining us tonight, and thank you again to Supervisor Mitchell, Dr. Hayes Bautista, and our 2nd District for an incredible discussion.
That's it. Thank you all for coming.